I'm joined today by Pedram Navid, who is a data influencer and consultant. He is also formerly my boss. This is a first for me, I think, in any context, let alone live streaming, interviewing a former boss, which is awesome. You were the head of data here at Hightouch. Now you've gone on to become a free agent as a consultant. We'll get into all of that. Before we talk about what you did at Hightouch, what you're doing now, let's talk about you. A lot of people know you from Twitter. You've got a big following there among the data community. Where did you come from, Pedram? How did you get into data? I actually don't know that story.
Where did I come from? That's a good question.
Where do any of
Uh,
us come from?
right. I mean, my mom and dad met a long time ago, and one thing led to another, and I ended up in school for philosophy, English, and psychology. So right on the
Okay.
track for head of data. I was doing part-time tech support with a bank, and they outsourced the help desk to India, and I was part of a state-backed team. And because of that outsourcing, there were now SLAs and metrics and contracts. And because of those things, we had to measure what was happening with this help desk, because if they didn't meet the targets, then they're not hitting the same quality levels that we agreed upon. And they were sending us their data in a PowerPoint spreadsheet, which is not great. You see just today's metrics. And so I took it upon myself to see if there's a better way of sort of reporting on this. I opened up Excel, and one thing led to another. I started building dashboards. I got into Python. I got into R. It's a slippery slope once you open up Excel. And from there, 12 years went by at the bank. I became a data scientist. And that was sort of like a condensed history of data. From
That's
there,
so
yeah,
interesting. Everyone, I mean, it's such a new field that everyone has their own way of getting into it in terms of the data science specifically, but I didn't know that, like a story that started with tech support and then outsourcing, and then to a certain degree, you like made the most of that and made yourself useful and then had this meteoric rise up to being a data scientist.
I joke that like I'm always just motivated by laziness. A lot of the work was just avoiding more manual work I didn't want to do. And
Mhm.
that's highly motivating for me. And that's how I learned programming, is because I didn't want to manually go into a bunch of servers to find out what patch was installed. I wanted to let the computer do that for me. And that sort of exercise of always trying to be more and more lazy has led me to kind of where I am today.
I love it, and the all the coding, Python, R, all of it, obviously SQL along the way, was self-taught then?
Yeah. A
Okay,
lot
I
of
think it's
Stack
important to say
Overflow.
that because
Yeah.
it so many people obviously who are newer on this entering this, I think, get intimidated when they see folks like you and
I don't know anything. I'm not that smart. Trust me. I didn't go to school for stats or computers. I don't know how algorithms really work that well. I just figure out what I need to know to get the job done. And when I have a problem in front of me, like that's very motivating for me, and that's easy to sort of like sink my teeth into. If you tell me to go learn something for the sake of learning something, honestly, I probably won't do it. I could try, but if I have like a deadline and a problem and like something that needs to be fixed, yeah, I'll learn Python, I'll learn SQL, I'll learn R in order to get that way.
so that was all with a bank in Canada. What then you came to Silicon Valley to work initially for startups?
Initially for another bank.
Okay.
So my wife, then girlfriend, lived in San Francisco. And so I was trying to find a way to like sneakily come over here. I thought a transfer from one bank to another kind of made sense. So I did that. I spent 3 months there and then I quit because I did nothing. I literally did nothing for the 3 months that I was there. So then I thought, enough banking. Let's try the startup thing. And then I joined a few startups since then. So almost always early stage, early employee. Everything's a mess. No one knows what's going on. And we're all figuring it out together kind of situation, which can be a little bit of fun, a little bit of chaos, but I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it sounds like the problem-solving side of you, it probably works for that. So, so you came to Hightouch a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and you were the head of data and the first data hire. Um, so head of data is a big title. What does it ideally mean, head of data?
Oh, ideally, I don't know. Um, Ideally, it means you get paid a lot of money to do data stuff. I think that's everyone's sort of dream. So let's hope that's what
Yeah.
happens. I think in reality, it's like just solving data problems at a senior level, usually at these earlier stage companies for the most part, all the way to much later. So, I mean, I don't know what the role should be. It definitely isn't going to be the role that I had for most people. At Hightouch, I was responsible for our internal data stack, but also product and marketing type of activities, helping build community, helping people understand what type of integrations to build with dbt, for example. All these little like nuances within Hightouch. That's probably not something most heads of data are involved in, I would say. Um, most probably spend more of their time actually working on the internal data stack than I would be.
So you are the type of data person who can do it all in terms of you've been a data scientist. You know all of the data infrastructure. You very much have been a data engineer. I don't know if you'd consider that, but you did a lot of that at Hightouch, and everything in between. In terms of what you're seeing now as a consultant, when you put yourself out there in the market, what are kind of the biggest needs that your sense is? You know, what are you in the most demand for?
So it's interesting. When I thought I was going to start my consulting gig, I thought I would be helping companies with data infrastructure, data needs, whatever they are.
Mhm.
Um, but most of the requests have been more on the product and marketing side by data companies.
Hmm.
And so that's where I've been spending most of my time. Absolutely not what I was expecting, to be honest. Um, that said, I do talk to data companies or normie companies as well who are just doing data for fun. And on that side, I think the biggest issues are like just not enough resources. They can't hire people to maintain or build the things they need to do, uh, or things are just too complicated, and it's impossible to integrate everything. Even though a lot of these tooling has appeared in a lot of ways to sort of help with the more difficult engineering aspects,
Mhm.
getting the data in the right place and ensuring it has the right level of quality and it's there at the right time. And all those systems are operating cohesively together. It's still really, really difficult for a lot of companies.
That's the marketing part is so interesting to me because as someone who has more skills on that side than on the technical side, I would have thought the real demand is on the technical side. But I guess there's a market for all of it right now if you're good at it.
I think there's not a lot of people who can do both the data side and the like product and marketing side really well.
Mhm.
So that's probably why people are working with me, I would say. Not to say that data people can't do it. I think maybe it's just a newer thing for us. I think marketing is more creative than data in some ways. So, I mean, if you had told me 4 years ago I'd be working as a marketing consultant, I would have laughed at you. But I genuinely think it's like if you're working with companies you actually like and you really believe in their product, helping them sort of understand how to position and how to understand their audience and how to focus on what they want to build and prioritize things in messaging, like all that stuff can actually be really fun and creative in a way that like sure data's creative in its own way sometimes
Mhm.
you're doing some analysis, but a lot of it is like rote and routine and kind of like just plugging holes. So I've enjoyed it. I don't know if it'll be something I do for the rest of my life, but
What do you see companies doing wrong without calling out anyone in particular? What are kind of the top tips for how to market in this space?
a lot of people actually came to me after I announced that I'm starting my consulting gig, and they said, "Hey,
Mhm.
Pedram, can you write me a blog post for my company?"
Mhm.
And I think it's a funny thing to ask someone. Like, yes, I can, but I don't know if that's going to give you what you want. Um, Usually, people don't want blog posts. They want revenue. They want users. They want signups. That's the kind of
Mhm.
stuff people actually care about at their companies, right? So a lot of the time we forget like the purpose of marketing is to bring those things in, and we focus on, well, another company did X, Y, and Z, so maybe we should do that too. So dbt is a great example. They did really well with Slack and open source, and that they've like channeled that in such a great way to generate 30,000 people in their Slack community. That's not going to work for every company, right? If you have a different type of sales motion or product or users, then copying somebody else is not really going to work for you. So really, you need to think all the way from the beginning of the marketing process of like, what are my goals? What do I want to accomplish? Who are my users? What are their problems? How will I message to them? How do I sell to them? And then marketing should support that rather than just being this thing you pick up from someone else and try to replicate. So maybe open source and Slack works for you in your market. or maybe it
Mhm.
absolutely does not. Maybe you need to focus more on case studies. Maybe you need to focus more on sales collateral. Like there's no universal solution to this marketing problem. It's just like thinking about really first principles, like how does marketing work? It puts your product in front of people. What's the best way for me to do that? You start there, and the rest kind of just starts to make sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot about how, uh, I mean, we're just all so overwhelmed with content, obviously in our daily lives, with everything, but then specifically within the space, even if you even with someone like me who gets paid to keep up on this stuff and read all the Substacks and be in the communities, it's still way too much to take in. So what actually makes me want to listen to somebody? I don't know the answers. I think it's partly personalities, right? It's somebody you connect with because they explain things well, or because they're super hot, or no, just kidding, or because
That's how I got successful.
yes, um, the you connect with them on a personal level with something about them, um, but I think for me, the newsletters I come back to, for example, are the ones that are really well written, and I know they're the classics in the industry. Obviously, you're in a newsletter,
Yeah,
but like Tristan and Ben's, and I hate that I'm listening to white dudes, but those are the ones that I read every week. I shouldn't say Tristan's team and Ben, so DBT and then Ben Stansel. Those are the ones I'm like, I want to read these because it's written so well. That's not what resonates with everybody. Who knows? In a month, we might be talking, and we only listen to messages that are on TikTok. It's always obviously evolving, but I think for me, it's something also that's educational, right? People that this kind of gets at some of what you're doing in your blog, like taking the concepts that we need to understand better and breaking them
yeah.
down.
You have to deliver value, 100%. There's two things you have to do every single time. And if you can't do them, don't bother writing a single thing. Deliver value and offer something unique or creative. Don't copy what's already out there because someone else has done it. And there's no value. You won't get people to look at it. You won't get people to care. But if you can genuinely do something useful, that instantly puts you above 95% of the content out there. So I think that's step one. Like a great example is a post I wrote on Airflow, Prefect, and Dagster. I
Hmm.
was just internally curious about these three things, and I knew if I was, other people probably were too. I Googled it. I couldn't find a great comparison that sort of met my standards. And so then I decided, okay, that's a piece of content I want to write. And I can't just write it by Googling what these three things are and looking at their feature pages. You have to install these three software. You have to use them. You have to understand them. You have to look at the code and be like, okay, here's the pros and cons of each. I know it because I've touched it and I've felt it. If you don't do that, then you're just going to write content that everyone else writes. And then it might be kind of maybe useful from an SEO perspective, but it won't be a great post. And then people won't share it. They won't like it. It's not going to do anything for you.
It's not going to catch on. Absolutely. You have a Substack. I don't know if you post on a certain cadence or not, but you've got quite a few articles out there on it already. The latest one came out yesterday. I don't know if you timed it for the show, but it was good timing. um, on the metrics layer. So the metrics layer is one of those terms that I'm convinced we all say and nobody really understands. It's also the semantic layer. Not that nobody really understands it, but it's
No, no
convoluted
one
and there are
understands it.
many
Don't worry.
possible
Yeah, you're
definitions.
correct.
Let's be honest. But you did try to explain it. So let's go into that. And no pressure, but I'm hoping that your answer is going to be like 2 minutes so I can cut it out into a perfect little soundbite. If it's longer than 2 minutes, that's okay. But let's just start with what we mean when we say the metrics layer.
The metrics layer is both an attempt to create a category that you can package up and sell as a product. That's the critical lens on it. The other lens is it's nothing more than a way to define some rules around how you should aggregate and filter numbers, right? Some numbers should be added, some should be averaged, some should be rounded, some should be percentages, some are ratios, some are the difference between two. Those rules we often end up defining multiple times because we reuse that logic when we're writing DBT models, for example. And so I did this all the time. Pre-metrics layer, you would define revenue 4 or 5 times in different places and aggregate them up weekly, monthly, daily. whatever you want, right? So a metrics layer sort of abstracts that complexity away and lets you define those rules for those aggregations so that you can leverage it ideally in multiple products, although currently they're kind of tied into one particular BI tool or another.
Go a little bit more into detail on how you and everyone who's experienced this can sometimes end up with one metric for revenue, we'll say, for ARR, for annual recurring revenue, and how you can end up with different ways of calculating it, which is problematic. How does that happen in the workflow?
As soon as you defined the same thing twice in two different places, you've opened up yourself for eventually drifting apart. You wouldn't define them in two places if they matched perfectly in the first place. Like sometimes you need ARR for marketing and you need ARR for finance and you need ARR for sales. And sales says they want to take account things that are booked into the future but haven't paid yet. And finance says, no, that's illegal. We need to do it the GAAP way. And so
Mhm.
now you have two metrics. That can sort of evolve over time as you think about changes you got to make to calculations. Maybe you initially only had a Salesforce sales motion. Eventually you add self-serve and sort of the complexity starts to add up. And as you have these different pieces of metrics all over the place, it can become really hard to keep track of them all. And
Mhm.
so maybe you fix it in one and you forget to fix it in another. And that's kind of when you end up in a bad place.
And this is happening all the time, in all sorts of companies. The ideal workflow, again, before we talk about whether there's a terrific platform or solution for the metrics layer, but the ideal workflow is you bring your data into the warehouse, you model it for your different purposes, and your business's key metrics like ARR and the other ones are calculated in a metrics layer, whether that's in dbt or somewhere else, before your data goes anywhere else to BI or out to your business platforms with reverse ETL or whatever.
That's the
That's the ideal
proposal.
world?
I don't know if it's ideal. I haven't
Okay.
seen it yet, right? So
Okay.
that's the proposed world that I think people like DBT or companies like DBT are trying to
Mhm.
sort of rally around. And there's an appealing aspect to it, right? You're defining all your transforms in DBT anyway. Why not just tack on some metrics right there? You're basically right there anyway when you're doing the work. You can define it in one place. Then you have integrations into your different BI tools, and everyone's reading off that same sort of source of truth. That's the proposal. Whether or not that actually turns out to be ideal, we won't know until it happens and people adopt it. It's easy to think that that's a great solution, but there could be all kinds of downstream negative impacts of that because maybe if DBT becomes sort of this de facto metrics layer, other tools have a harder time going above and beyond what DBT has built. And so now they have to rely on DBT for maybe future updates. So maybe they decide, oh, we actually have to build our own metrics layer on top of DBT's metrics layer, and then you have the same problem all over again, right? And then
Right.
there's tools that might never integrate. Like if you have Looker, what if they decide they don't want to use a DBT metrics layer because they already have LookML? Then do you have to maintain metrics in two different places? So I'm less bullish on this like universal loved solution that'll work for everybody. I think
Mhm.
in principle it kind of makes sense. I'd love to see DBT, manage this well and have a solid layer that can be used by many people and different companies and different products.
And so in the article you published yesterday, you explained sort of what dbt is doing with it now, which is sort of a slow rollout of the semantic layer. We're going to learn more at Coalesce next month. And then you also show kind of, or you dive into Looker's solution for now and Lightdash. Do you want to kind of tell us how those platforms are trying to solve?
So I think Looker is the traditional version of a metrics layer. Um, I don't even know if they call themselves a metrics layer really, but in many ways, when you adopt Looker and you have your data in your data warehouse, Looker becomes a place to define metrics. You have these things
Mhm.
called views. You can define how things like revenue, ARR, should be aggregated, how it should be broken apart, what are the different groups you want it in. You can do nice things with filters and formatting. You can do a lot of like basic definitions of what it takes to really present a number to somebody within LookML. It works really well. I mean, it's a little old, but it's had a lot of time as well to develop and become pretty robust for any sort of use case you can think of. It's composable. It's got a syntax editor. If you make a mistake in the code, it'll tell you live, so you can kind of see where you made a mistake or not. It's not a perfect language for sure, but it works pretty well in that respect. And what
Mhm.
it does is it makes it easier for a data analyst or analytics engineer when they're developing models, because now they don't have to define a new table for every sort of random request that comes in. People can go into Looker, the joins are already preset, the aggregation rules are set. And so within like the bounds of governance, you're allowed to kind of play around and get what you want without having to ask a data person to go, add me this column from this other table, create a join on these two things, create one more thing here, roll it up weekly. No, roll it up monthly. You don't have to go through all that with Looker. That's sort of the benefit. I think everyone kind of agrees that the value of something like that is really high. That's, I think, the prototypical example of a metrics layer. dbt has gone in a different direction. They're saying don't tie your metrics layer to your BI tool because you want that data available everywhere. And so they moved the metrics layer within dbt itself. Now it's very early in development, so it's probably going to change. But right now, you sort of define your metrics within the same code you define your dbt models and test in. It's all in one place. Is that the right place? We don't know, but that's kind of how they're approaching it right now. The language they're using is YAML. It's not like a Looker
Mhm.
language, like Looker has their own language. It's YAML, which has its pros and cons. I would say mostly cons because you don't get a lot of things like syntax checking. It's hard to know whether or not you had a mistake. Um, it's kind of a clunky interface as well for a lot of more complex queries. But again, there's a lot of potential benefit if it's done right because all your downstream tools can now speak metrics.
So if you're whether you're doing your metrics in Looker or dbt or again whatever workflow you have,
Yeah.
it's just being aware of the limitations of because none of these are perfect right now. And just briefly, Light Dash, you said is also a good. There's a lot of potential there.
I don't even know if Lightdash considers itself a metrics layer, but it kind of is evolving into one anyway. They do accept the dbt metrics layer, like that's one interface that they accept,
Hmm.
but they also have their own Lightdash metrics you can define within the project. You can kind of pick and choose. I think one of the reasons they had to do that was because, again, they wanted some features that weren't quite in the dbt metrics layer. And so you can't just wait until they develop it. They had to go and develop their own. In a lot of ways, it's a lot like Looker. It's got a similar interface. It's tied to the BI tool. It supports things like joins, which can be really useful. But in a lot of ways, it's also like dbt. It's using YAML. Like Dash is an open source project. I imagine they'll have like an API, and it might be more exposable. So it's kind of a middle ground between the two. But I mean, it's still so early, and I don't think they even consider themselves really a metrics layer. It's really hard to say like what the future will kind of hold and what they'll look like in a bit.
Yeah, so it's all still really muddy, but your blog does make it a little bit less muddy, and those are all good things to think about. I need to learn Looker. I'm working more on getting deeper into dbt, and then I think I'll move on to Looker when I'm ready. Um, Final question, Pedram. What do you think makes a good leader in our industry? And maybe leader is not the right word, but more like not necessarily just from a marketing standpoint, but from a general human and intellectual standpoint. Like, what makes a voice that you want to listen to in data?
That is a good question. I don't know. I think for me is two things. Authenticity, not too much ego. You can have a little bit, it's fun, but don't be so full of yourself that you can't take a joke, I would say. I don't know. There's a lot of people out there, it kind of feels like they want to be a leader, be a thought leader, or be known for something like that. And that kind of just gives me red flags, to be honest. So maybe a good leader is one who doesn't want to be one, I would say.
Yeah,
Other than
yeah.
that, I don't know if I have great answers. I don't know about leadership so much as I just like people, and if I like them, if they pass my vibe check, then I kind of listen to them and read what they have to say.
Right. Sort of when it's a kind of unofficial thing at work, it's just that natural connection. And I think I would echo a lot of what you said, certainly the authenticity, certainly people who aren't just there to sell whatever they're making or whatever their colleagues made. And then the learning part, like people who like I'm amazed to see you and other people who are very, very advanced in all of the work and genuinely ask questions because they want to learn from other people. And then it like helps everyone else learn along with you, which is really nice. It makes it easier to ask questions, right? for those of us who are newer in the data journey. Like sometimes I have questions and I'm like, oh, people are going to think I'm, you know, not deep enough in the data to ask that.
I guarantee you people think that about me. I
Yeah, yeah,
guarantee you people think that about me. So
yeah.
that never goes away. You just stop caring, I think, at some point of what other
Mhm,
people think. A little bit. Never fully goes away, but for the most part, I think I'm pretty confident in what I do know, and I just know there's more out there that I'll never ever know, and that's okay. Um, that's one of the
It's
reasons I
hard.
started like the LinkedIn group as well,
Oh, yes.
data to data. It was really because I heard a lot of feedback from people who were afraid to ask questions, like you said, and I think part of it is like some of the environments we have around like community. They can be kind of a weird place for people. I think a lot of people might feel like it's a little bit clicky right now. It's a
Mhm,
little too inside, and it can be hard to sort of put yourself in that situation when you're not familiar with all the faces and people that are in there. So you look at Twitter and, it's the same 25, 30 people always in these data conversations, always talking to each other and making fun of each other.
mhm.
Now, I would say they're generally pretty good people and they're nice people, but if you don't know them, you might not feel comfortable asking questions, right? And then you go to like DBT Slack, there's just 30,000 people. It's kind of hard to really even have a sense of community anymore in something like that. So the LinkedIn group, it's really just let's try and find a way to gather people, encourage question asking, and then just build sort of the environment where people can more thoughtfully respond as well. Like it's hard to respond to a hard question in 140 characters. And do I really want to tweet 15 pages worth of threads to respond to why schemas exist or something? Not really. But I find the LinkedIn, at least for now, it's been mostly practitioner focused. I tend to ask a bunch of questions just to encourage others to ask as well. And I've been seeing a lot of nice activity, so hoping that continues.
So if anybody wants an invite to Pedram's private LinkedIn group, data for data practitioners, it's an
Something like
amazing,
that. It's
amazing
now
new
it's now
community.
listed, so you can find it. It's no longer a
It's
secret
listed.
anymore.
Okay, it's
It
only
is
not
listed.
no longer invite only. I love that. And with that and all the work you do, I know you make an effort to make it inclusive because everything you said about the kind of cliquishness that can happen applies even more so obviously to women. It's harder to make your way in those, and I imagine, can't speak from personal experience, but I imagine also for people of color it's probably hard to make your way into these places because it's intimidating. I actually spoke a few days ago with someone in our field, I won't say the name, but who has like the most prestigious formal credentials you could ever admit, and he and I were just chatting, and I confided to him that I feel a little bit intimidated going into the Slack and locally optimistic communities through no fault of their own. Like, they make efforts to be welcoming, but I just feel intimidated. And he's like, oh, I feel the same. So I was like, okay, it's not just me. There's something maybe about all of these type of industry communities, and the more efforts we can all make to bring more voices in, the more we're going to learn together. So without being too cheesy about it, that's the goal, right? Okay, we're over time, Pedram. Two quick shout outs, the usual to Women in Data. We make a donation, as you know, Pedram, in the guest's name for every episode to Women in Data's Scholarship Fund. They're an awesome organization and super happy to partner with them. And a special thanks this week to Airbyte, who gave this show, The Data Tea, an award for being one of the best new podcasts. Thank you so much to Airbyte. The funny thing is we're not technically a podcast yet, so thanks for the award. We will be a podcast soon, so then we'll get on more of those amazing podcast lists, hopefully. So thank you, Pedram. We'll talk soon. And I guess I'll see you on Twitter as I do every night.
Thank you very much.